There's a story archivists whisper the way sailors whisper about reefs. Not because they can prove it, not because they can point to a photograph, a catalog number, a page you can hold up to the light and say, "Here, look at this." They whisper it because the shape of it feels like something that could exist in a world like Rome, where paper mattered, where names were currency, and where the powerful learned early that the safest crimes are the ones that never become public law. The story usually begins inside a place that already feels like a confession booth for empires. A locked reading room, a long table, white gloves, a lamp that pools light onto old pages like a spotlight. Somewhere inside the Vatican's archives, somewhere behind numbered doors and layered permissions, there is said to be a ledger, not a sermon, not a prayer book, not a saint's biography, a list, names, rows of them, and beside the names, ages, dates, estates, sums, and a final column where outcomes are reduced to one word, not poetry, not morality, status. The legend claims someone found it during cataloging work in the 19th century, that it was flagged as not suitable, that it was quietly classified, that it was pushed back into darkness with a note that amounted to the oldest command power has ever spoken. Do not publish this. Over time, the legend grows extra details the way mold grows on damp stone. People attach a famous Vatican scholar to it to make it feel real. People attach a date. People attach a scandal. People attach the kind of neat certainty that makes audiences relax. Because if you can point to one forbidden object, you can pretend the truth is contained. But when you hold the legend up to the simplest kind of light, the kind that reveals dates, the most popular version collapses. The scholar's name often attached to the discovery, Giuseppe Cozzaluzzi, was a real man, a real scholar connected to Vatican manuscripts. But the timeline people repeat doesn't work. The year they love to cite doesn't fit the life they're borrowing. The legend uses a real name like a wax seal and hopes you won't press too hard. That doesn't mean there was never a ledger. It doesn't mean no list ever existed. It doesn't mean no one ever catalogued something they regretted reading. It means something colder. It means we cannot treat the ledger as proven evidence. We have to treat it as what it is, a legend people keep inventing because it explains a hunger the record can't satisfy. Because the reason people want this ledger to exist is not childish fascination. It's not just a taste for forbidden stories. It's the suspicion that the paper trail should be there. Rome documented everything that mattered to men with property. Wills, contracts, debt bonds, marriage settlements, inventories, lists of witnesses, receipts for land and grain and bodies. So if there was a system, organized, routine, profitable, that pulled young women out of vulnerable households and delivered them upward, then where are the records? Why do so many lives vanish into silence when Rome was so obsessed with writing? That is the real mystery. Not one ledger, the shape of the absence. And if we follow that shape honestly, we end up somewhere more disturbing than a single locked book. We end up inside the machinery Rome built. Machinery that didn't need an official first-night law to produce the same result. Because Rome didn't always need to write a law to enforce it. Sometimes the law was the room you walked into. Sometimes the law was the debt you couldn't repay. Sometimes the law was the patron you couldn't refuse. Sometimes the law was your father's trembling hands on the latch as he opened the door. You are 18, old enough for Rome to pretend you have choice. You stand in the back of a crowded atrium, listening to men talk about money in a voice that tries to sound casual. Your father is hosting, or he is performing hosting the way poor men perform confidence for rich ones. The lamps are bright, the wine is poured, the compliments are traded like coins. Then a visitor arrives who changes the air. A man with a calm face and expensive fabric. A man who speaks softly because he doesn't need volume. People step aside for him without thinking. Your father smiles too quickly. A notary follows, carrying a leather case. Two witnesses linger near the doorway, as if they were invited not to celebrate, but to confirm. Your father's patron doesn't look at you at first. He speaks about repayment, about timing, about obligations, about patience, about loyalty. Then his eyes drift toward you, and you understand the Ledger legend in your bones. Because you are not being seen as a daughter, you are being seen as collateral. Before we go deeper, subscribe to Requiem of Thrones. It's the only way this channel can keep pulling buried history back into the light. Here is the mistake most people make when they hear the phrase, First Night Law. They imagine a statute carved into stone, a paragraph in a legal code, a clean, brutal sentence that says a powerful man may take a bride's first night. That kind of law would be easy to hate. It would be easy to point to. It would be easy to condemn as barbaric. But Rome was not always so crude. Rome often preferred a more efficient kind of cruelty, the kind that can be explained away as procedure. Because written laws can be debated, written laws can be limited, written laws can be challenged, unwritten expectations can be denied, and denial is the most powerful armor power has ever worn. So when we talk about the Vatican Ledger legend, we're not really talking about one object in one archive. We're talking about the feeling that something was large enough, organized enough, repeated enough that there should have been lists. There should have been names. There should have been paperwork. And the fact that we don't have it leaves a vacuum large enough for legend to grow inside. Rome ran on documentation. It ran on witnesses. It ran on signatures and seals and receipts. If you sold land, you recorded it. If you transferred property, you recorded it. If you arranged marriages among the wealthy, you recorded it. If you settled disputes, you recorded it. If you created obligations, you recorded them. And yet, when it comes to the most vulnerable, when it comes to young women whose lives could be reshaped by debt, by patronage, by paternal authority, the record thins out until it becomes almost transparent. Not because nothing happened, because the archive itself was built to preserve what powerful men needed to preserve. Women's experiences rarely mattered to the record unless they became a dispute between men. That is not a conspiracy. It is structure. A civilization can preserve 1,000 documents about grain and leave almost nothing about what happened to the daughter of a debtor when the debt came due. The Ledger legend exists because it promises to reverse that structure. It promises a list where the powerless finally appear as countable, identifiable, recorded. But if we're honest, the more disturbing possibility is this. What if the record doesn't exist because no one with power wanted it preserved in plain language? What if the system worked best when it was never described too clearly? To understand how a first night could happen without a law, you have to understand how Rome made consent irrelevant without ever saying the word force. Rome had 4 mechanisms that could turn a household into a trap: debt, patronage, paternal authority, shame, debt first. In Rome, debt was not just numbers, it was relationship. A man could borrow money and in return become bound to someone above him, socially, politically, practically. Even when the harshest, older forms of debt bondage were restricted or reshaped, the logic remained. Obligation could swallow a life. And Rome's own stories about its earlier debt system, stories told to explain reforms, are revealing not because they function like a modern court record, but because they show what Romans believed debt could make plausible. The creditor has power. The debtor is vulnerable. The body becomes exposed. Reform comes not only because the economics are unfair, but because the arrangement becomes a stage for humiliation and abuse. Even when the old forms are said to end, the system does not vanish. It evolves. It becomes smoother, cleaner, more deniable. Instead of chaining a debtor, you bind him with favors. Instead of a visible collar, you use invisible consequences. Instead of public brutality, you use private arrangements. That brings us to patronage. Every morning in Rome, before sunrise, clients line up outside a wealthy man's home. They wait in the cold. They are admitted in order. They greet him. They praise him. They receive small gifts or promises. The city calls it tradition, social glue, mutual obligation. But the truth is simpler. It is a daily demonstration of hierarchy. It is Rome admitting openly that protection and survival flow downward from men at the top. A patron could defend you in court. A patron could also let you drown. A patron could introduce you to business. A patron could also whisper a few words and make every deal dry up. So when a patron wants something from your family, something you cannot afford to deny, he doesn't need a statute. He needs leverage. He needs your father to understand the consequences of refusal without him ever having to state them. That brings us to paternal authority. Rome treated the household as a small state and the father as its ruler. The father controlled marriages. He controlled property. He controlled the family's public alliances. In practice, that meant if a father believed compliance was necessary to keep the household alive, the daughter's wishes could be treated like a luxury the family couldn't afford. And finally, shame. Rome was obsessed with reputation. Scandal could destroy a family without a sword being drawn. A patron didn't always have to threaten you with violence. He could threaten you with exposure, with whispers, with the possibility that your family becomes the subject of jokes and accusations and legal harassment. And here is where the first night myth becomes psychologically real, even if it was never carved into stone. Because in a system like this, you can create a situation where a young woman cannot refuse without destroying everyone she loves. Not because a law forces her, because dependency does. Now, the legend of the ledger often places the system in the late Republic, in the era of violent politics and elite arrogance, because it is the easiest place to imagine it. This is where names like Publius Clodius Pulcher appear. Clodius is remembered for scandal, for gangs, for the kind of political theater that made Rome feel like a city always on the edge of civil war. He had powerful enemies, and those enemies accused him of everything they could fit into language. In Rome, sexual accusation was a standard weapon. So if you build a system out of every insult in a political speech, you can end up inventing more than you prove. But here's what matters. Even if the accusations were exaggerated, they only worked as weapons because they were plausible to the audience. You cannot destroy a man with a story that sounds impossible. You destroy him with a story that makes everyone quietly think, yes, that sounds like him. That sounds like men like him. So the question becomes less, did Clodius run a documented network? And more, what kind of society makes that accusation believable? A society built on patronage, a society where the powerful treat the law like something they can use rather than something that restrains them, a society where dependent households can be pressured into silence. That society was Rome. Now imagine the mechanism in practice. A father is in debt. He owes money to a man above him. Maybe he borrowed for a business venture that failed. Maybe he borrowed to pay for legal trouble. Maybe he borrowed simply to survive a bad season. He thinks debt is financial. He thinks repayment is money. Then a messenger arrives. Not in armor, not with a sword, but with polite clothing and papers. The messenger asks to speak privately. The father goes into the back room. The door closes. Inside, the language is clean. It has to be. Clean language makes dirty action easier to carry. Settlement. Security. Arrangement. Temporary custody. Words that can mean anything and can always be defended as innocent. The messenger explains that the patron has been patient. The patron has been generous. The patron has protected the household. Now the patron expects loyalty. The father listens. The father's face changes. The father understands the cliff edge behind the polite words. The father asks what happens if he refuses. The messenger smiles, not cruelly, but like someone explaining reality. Refusal means the debt is called in. Refusal means lawsuits. Refusal means no protection. Refusal means your business dies. Refusal means your sons cannot work. Refusal means your family becomes a warning story. The father goes quiet, and this is where Rome's cruelty becomes complete. Because the father is not being asked to sign a confession of violence, he is being asked to agree. He is being asked to participate in the language that turns coercion into procedure. He steps out of the back room. His wife looks at him, his daughter looks at him, and he cannot say what has been agreed, because saying it out loud turns it into what it is. So he says what Roman households have said for centuries when something shameful is being done in the name of survival. You must go for a time. He says it gently, as if gentleness changes reality. The daughter asks where. The father says, it will be safe. The father says, it will be temporary. The father does not meet her eyes, because meeting her eyes would mean admitting what he has traded. A cart waits outside, not an official state cart with insignia, a private cart, covered, clean. A servant helps her in. A notary may be there, not because the notary cares, but because wealthy men love documentation when it protects them. Witnesses may be there, not because they are monsters, but because in Rome, people are trained to accept certain things as the cost of order. The cart rolls through the city. The temples stand. The markets open. Life continues. This is the part that horrifies modern minds. The normality, the way a system can operate inside daylight. The girl arrives at a house where slaves outnumber citizens. A steward takes her name as if she is an item delivered. A servant leads her to a room. The door closes. Time changes. In some households, the young woman is kept out of sight, used privately, her presence known only to slaves and a few close allies. In other households, she is displayed, dressed well, instructed to serve, placed in corners during banquets as living proof of a man's reach. A message without words. Look what my power obtains. And if you ask where the girl's family is, the answer is always the same. They are silent. They cannot afford to be anything else. Now you might ask, if this happened, why don't we have the proof? Why don't we have the lists? Why don't we have the names? And here we return to the Ledger legend. Because Rome's record is not neutral. Rome's record is what survives through centuries of copying, selection, and preservation. Rome preserved law because law is legitimacy. Rome preserved speeches because speeches are power. Rome preserved inscriptions because inscriptions are status. But the experiences of dependent young women, especially those taken through arrangements that could be defended as lawful, did not serve the public self-image of the men in control. So those experiences dissolve. They survive only as rumors, as hints, as angry denunciations, as jokes, as silences so heavy you can feel them. And there is another reason the record is thin. Even when documents existed, they could be phrased in language that hides the reality. A contract can record a transfer without specifying what the transfer truly involved. A ledger can record temporary custody without telling you what happened inside the closed door. A notary can witness settlement without describing what was paid. That is the genius of procedural cruelty. It produces paperwork that can be defended. Paperwork that can survive scrutiny. Paperwork that never says the quiet part out loud. So if a ledger like the legend describes ever existed, it might not have been written as a list of crimes. It might have been written as a list of transactions. A system that didn't see itself as evil does not label itself evil. It labels itself order. And this is where the legend is psychologically accurate, even if it is not documentarily proven. People imagine a ledger of names because a system like this would generate paperwork. But the paperwork would not be kept for moral reasons. It would be kept for control, for leverage, for disputes, for accountability. Accountability not to the victims, but to the men negotiating power above them. And if later generations wanted to preserve the myth of Rome as civilized, they would have strong incentives to let such records disappear, to stop copying them, to stop preserving them, to bury them under more respectable paper. Not because there was one grand purge led by one villain, because the archive has always been an instrument of power. What gets saved is what power wants saved. What gets forgotten is often what power finds embarrassing. Now, a brief word about wedding night rituals, because you asked for this to be a different story, and it is. But the overlap matters. Rome's marriage culture shows the same mentality, the obsession with legitimacy, the idea that intimacy is not purely personal, but tied to inheritance and status. In some elite contexts, the wedding night could be treated like a procedure, a moment where the household wants certainty, where witnesses and attendants and older matrons exist not for romance, but for verification. That doesn't prove a first night law. It proves something more important. Rome had already trained itself to treat bodies as documents. Once a society does that, it becomes easier for powerful men to treat a young woman as currency. If marriage is already a contract, then it becomes tempting for a patron to insert himself into the contract as a term. If legitimacy is already a public concern, then it becomes tempting for elite men to control legitimacy as a weapon. And if the powerless have no voice, then the entire machine can operate without leaving behind the kind of testimony we crave. Now imagine the return. Because systems of exploitation rarely end with drama. They end with quiet, because quiet protects the powerful. A cart arrives at the same door the girl left. She steps down. Her household looks different, a little older, a little poorer, a little more afraid. Her mother stares, but doesn't speak. Her father's hands tremble. No one asks questions. No one wants answers spoken aloud, because the moment you speak it, you transform arrangement into accusation. And accusation is dangerous when the man above you still holds your debt. So the household does what Rome has trained it to do. It swallows the horror into silence and continues as if time didn't break. This is why we have so few voices. It is not merely that the victims didn't write. It's that they couldn't speak without losing the little protection they had left. Silence was not just cultural, it was survival. And this is why a ledger legend makes sense as a cultural phantom. Because the victims vanish so cleanly from the record that our minds reach for an explanation large enough to match the absence. A ledger locked away, a list hidden by an institution, a forbidden book that contains the names. But sometimes the absence has a simpler cause. Sometimes the record is missing because the system was designed to keep the victims unrecorded in the first place. Because writing down the full truth in plain words creates evidence. Evidence creates scandal. Scandal creates limits. Limits are what power fears. So power speaks in euphemism. Power uses procedures. Power makes victims invisible. And the only time the victims become visible is when their invisibility creates a problem for men, when an inheritance dispute erupts, when a legal battle requires documentation, when a scandal escapes into the public sphere. Otherwise, they remain what the archive is built to ignore. A gap, a silence, a missing name. Now return, one last time, to the Vatican Ledger legend. Not as a claim, but as a mirror. Why do people keep attaching it to real names? Real scholars? Real archives? Because the Vatican, in the modern imagination, is the symbol of custody. Centuries of holding the past behind gates. A fortress of paper. A place where someone could, in theory, hide a list and call it restricted and move on. It's a perfect villain because it represents the fear that truth is being controlled. But the deeper truth is that record control didn't begin in the Vatican. Record control began in Rome itself. The Roman world preserved what served Roman power. Later worlds inherited that bias. And every era that wanted Rome to remain a clean ancestor had reasons to prefer silence over detail. So does the story make more sense now? It should, because it doesn't ask the viewer to swallow a single unverifiable artifact as proof. It asks them to look at the machine, debt that becomes leverage, patronage that becomes coercion, paternal authority that becomes compliance, shame that becomes silence, a legal culture that documents everything that matters, except the suffering of those who weren't allowed to matter. And that is the real ledger. Not one book, a society, 1,000 households, 1,000,000 small arrangements made behind closed doors, spoken in polite vocabulary, enforced by consequences, and swallowed into silence because silence was the only way to survive. If you can control what gets written down, you can control what the future believes. Rome controlled the record. That's why so many names never reach us. That's why so many lives disappear. That's why legends grow where documents should be. Because somewhere inside us, we sense that what is missing is not just a book. It is the proof that the civilized world has always had a shadow economy of human bodies. And the most terrifying part is not that it happened. It's that it could happen so routinely and still leave behind only whispers.